Hey, how you doing? It is Sunday, 14th of February 2021, and this is episode 57 of the Notcast, where I talk about whatever it is that's on my mind to you. And some of you watch it, and some of you don't. Today's episode is about, because what better way to mark Valentine's Day than talking about Star Wars, which, of course, as we know, is the most romantic film trilogy of all time. Well, I'm going to talk about Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker. And to be completely unambiguous about it, of course, what the world needs more of is not Love, Sweet Love, but videos about Star Wars movies on YouTube. And here I am to satisfy your every Star Wars need. Well, I'm not, because Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker is crap. It's craven, it's cowardly, it's crude, it's awful. It's the worst Star Wars movie by a long, long way. And if you're looking for me to tell you about how good it is, I'm afraid to say there are other videos on the internet which you should be watching instead of this one. I'm not sure whether my opinion is popular or not. I really, really enjoyed The Last Jedi, as I discussed in a previous episode. And I really didn't enjoy The Rise of Skywalker. And I think the first thing to say is, when they started off making the sequel trilogy, as I understand it, The Force Awakens was put together through using a series of what Stanley Kubrick called non-submersible units. So Stanley Kubrick had a theory when it came to making movies, is that you had 6 or 7 really, really strong sequences in a film, and then you were able to join those sequences using connective tissue. A really good example of that is this film here. 2001, and 2001 has 6 or 7 really, really good, interesting scenes in it. This is a very early DVD release that has I think Cinetype, which is a 70mm frame from one of the original projections of it. And so 2001, I'm not going to show you this fancy box set in too much detail, has 6 or 7 really strong individual scenes in it. So those individual scenes that we have in 2001, by the way, you have the opening sequence with the Moon Watcher. You have the sequence which is obviously here, which is the space docking sequence. You have the scene with the moon and the Sentinel on the moon. And you have the scene where, you know, the film kind of goes through. So you have this scene here, which is the pod. You have the one where Hal is watching them talk, and then you have the scene at the end with lots of drugs that is better soundtracked by Pink Floyd. Now those 6 or 7 sequences that you stick together, and then you put those sequences together, and then you join the connective tissue to make it happen. And that's kind of what a good filmmaker might do. And for The Force Awakens, they did a similar thing. They started off and said, we've got 7 or 8 scenes that we're going to put together, and then we're going to join the connective tissue through the lot. But what they didn't do, and this is very, very clear in the Art of the Force Awakens book, is that they didn't have an overarching trilogy shape. So effectively, the Star Wars sequel films are the most expensive and experimental version of the school's round-robin storytelling fashion that you had. So when I was younger, for example, you would write a story, and the boy would write a line about a science fiction space night, and then the girl would write the line, and someone would go, well, actually, she really wanted to be a princess and play with puppies or something. And what it feels with The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker is that those 3 films were made by 3 separate visions without a cohesive arc that sat over the top of them, and without actually knowing what story they were going to tell. And the bottom line out of this is that The Rise of Skywalker is a terrible movie by any standards. And the reason it's a terrible movie is not because of the production design, not because of the art, not because of the music. By the way, John Williams' score is fantastic in this film, and Adam Driver and Daisy Ridley, in fact all of the actors do a great job with terrible, terrible material. And we were talking on Twitter yesterday about a film where you've got a perfectly cast character who does a perfectly good job inside a terrible movie. And for example, Ian McDiarmid does a great job in this movie, but the dialogue he's given is terrible and stupid. And no matter how good you are, terrible and stupid is not something you can act your way out of. You can make a good script great, but you can't make a bad script good if you're a great actor. And they've done some great casting in these movies, but the script itself for The Rise of Skywalker is awful. And what someone call 911 because I think I'm about to commit murder. It's craven, it's cowardly, it's crap. There's no character arcs in any of them. So, for example, when we started off with The Force Awakens, and this is something which the actor who plays Finn has identified, is that there is no character arc for his character at all. There's no character arc for Poe. There's no character arc for Finn. The character arc that we've got for Rey is that she finds out that really she is the granddaughter of the now resurrected clone of Emperor Palpatine, who didn't act. What? No, that's bullshit. So you watch a film, and sometimes there's a thing which is called the bullshit moment, and I've seen this happen a couple of times in the cinema. So when I saw Terminator Salvation in 2009, there was a scene where one of the people in the audience just went "fuck off" at the top of their voice because it was awful and it was stupid. And in order for the film to exist and the plot to be told, characters had to act in a way that broke the internal narrative and logic of the universe that they existed in. And what's really, really important, if you want anybody to take your creative activity, your writing, your narrative seriously, is to be able to have a consistent internal logic that makes sense. Especially if you're J.J. Abrams and you've got a mystery box, what you've got to do is to make sure it's a mystery box and it's not actually a mystery hexagon, because all of a sudden you can go, well, we thought it was a mystery box, but we realised we'd painted ourselves into a corner, and now what we've done is we painted a door onto the wall and we've walked through the door. And you go, no, you've broken all of the rules that you've set for yourself. And when I come to talk through every single one of the Steven Spielberg movies, the worst thing that Steven Spielberg has ever done is a short film called, I think it's The Mission, which he made in 1985 for the Amazing Stories TV show about a World War II bomber that has its landing gear shot off. And thanks to the power of the imagination of one of the people that is in the plane, by the way, these are spoilers for something that happened 36 years ago. Don't get mad at me, it's on YouTube. So the way that the plane lands at the end of it, because it's had its landing gear shot off, is through the power of the imagination of one of the people who's the gunner, who has been drawing furiously cartoon wheels, and the cartoon wheels pop out and the plane is enabled to land. And I was just like, that's bollocks. It really, really is absolute bollocks. And the size of Rye Walker is absolute bollocks. I'm going to start right from the beginning, and I'm just going to keep kicking the film until I stop kicking it or I run out of disk space, whichever is sooner. It starts off with a terrible narrative tale. And the first one is there's an info dump at the beginning, so that you should be able to watch. All the other Star Wars movies can make sense if you watch them without having understood the crawl at the beginning of the movies. The crawl at the beginning of Rise of Skywalker contains off-screen narration about something that's actually a critical plot point all the way through the film. So the first words in the crawl are, "The dead speak, a mysterious broadcast has heard Palpatine's voice." Show, don't tell, is really, really important in storytelling. And The Rise of Skywalker is an appalling piece of storytelling. It tells you as opposed to showing you. It hides information off in casual bits and it kind of hand waves its way through things and hopes that the speed in which the film moves will prevent you from thinking too much about the huge gaping plot holes that open up underneath it. Dominic Monaghan, I think, who was in from the Lord of the Rings movies, gets a role in this that is approximately smaller than my fingernail, and he ends up saying, cloning? Maybe? And that's not good enough for a film that has a $200-300 million budget. Is for some guy to go, clones? That's not good enough, okay? It's just shit storytelling all the way through, and The Rise of Skywalker is shit. Because no one's given it enough thought, and there's not been a plan all the way through. If somebody had made an arc all the way through, they designed the trilogy at the start in 2012, and then they'd maybe adapted it as it went along, but it followed the main core of that storytelling arc, we would have had a satisfactory film. Whereas what we clearly do is we have something that's being made up as it goes along. We've got the Emperor, who's introduced in the crawl. We've got Wayfinders, which we've never heard about in the other films, introduced in there. We've got a planet called Exegol that's been introduced that somehow is the secret Sith base that has been magically only just discovered in time for the 9th movie. And we've got a new helmet for Kylo Ren. So effectively, The Rise of Skywalker takes everything good that happened in The Last Jedi and retcons it out of existence. So it's a sequel to The Force Awakens, and aside from the fact that Luke Skywalker is dead at the end of The Last Jedi, everything in The Rise of Skywalker is a sequel to The Force Awakens and The Force Awakens only. And having read the Colin Trevorrow script for the film, which I think is called, Duel of the Fates, is much, much better. Absolutely staggeringly better. I would really wish we'd seen that film instead. So we've got the Emperor, we've got Wayfinders, we've got Exegol, which has suddenly appeared. We've got a cameo by Lando, who turns up for approximately 2.5 minutes. We've got a cameo by Wedge that lasts for one shot. Nine Numb gets killed off screen, which is sacrilege, because you go and all we've got is craven, unimaginative fan service. It's like somebody looked at the films and went, well, what do people like in Star Wars? Well, they like big bases. We'll have that. The Emperor will have that. We'll have a shot where they go, there's too many of them, because that's in the end of Return of the Jedi. So we'll have that in Rise of Skywalker. We'll have a bit where there's a grounds team that's going to assault a broadcast device that's going to help the baddies. Right, we'll have that in there. We'll have people riding on horses, but we're not going to call them horses. It'll just like Tauntauns in The Empire Strikes Back. And what you've got is shit that's clearly being made up as you go along. George Lucas famously said, we don't make movies, we make release dates. And the biggest problem that Lucasfilm ever had with these is that they made a release date, they didn't make a film. And what they did is they decided they were going to do 2 years between movies as opposed to 3, and then they ended up rushing it. So they made some profits by the end of the quarter, but what they did is they screwed the pooch with this film. They murdered the franchise. They dissatisfied. They fudged the ending, and they came up with a bit where they go clones and spaceships and the Emperor and things, and then they go, well, that way we can make a movie come out for the end of 2019, and you end up with a film that's just awful. I hate The Rise of Skywalker. It's a stupid film written with a stupid plot that does not make sense. The characters don't have plot arcs. The characters are smarter than they act in this film. And Finn spends at least a fair chunk of the movie going, I've got to tell you something, but he never gets to tell you what it is. He tells you that he's going to tell you something 3 times or 2 times, never tells you what it is. And I'm like, that's awful. And as I understand it, there were huge arguments between J.J. Abrams and Kathleen Kennedy, where he said at one point, why don't you take my name off the film? And then he wanted them to have the Rise of Skywalker be 2 movies in order to tell the story properly. And I think he handed in a 3-hour final cut that was then slashed down to 2.5. And it's also the only Star Wars film that doesn't have a commentary, presumably because JJ would go, well, this bit is pretty bad, and I'll tell you why it's pretty bad. Lucasfilm made the decision, and it wasn't good enough. And frankly, you've got to trust the talent, and you can't trust the accountants when it comes to these films. So this box set, which I bought, yes, I know I've got The Rise of Skywalker twice on Blu-ray. This box set I bought because of the other films, and as far as I'm concerned, part 3 of the Skywalker Saga, The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and the Rise of Skywalker are nothing but useless fan fiction. The only one of these that has any narrative integrity, vision, consistency, or imagination is The Last Skywalker. I genuinely wish they hadn't made these films and they'd just done Rogue One and Han Solo and then the TV stuff, because they've just... The characters and Star Wars deserves better than the sequel movies which were released. And there's a whole bunch of other things around the movie that I absolutely cannot stand. Everything that made The Last Jedi interesting is jettisoned as soon as they possibly can with it. And with The Rise of Skywalker, it's just stuff that happens as opposed to a story being told. You can almost set your watch by explosions. There's at least an explosion every 20 minutes. It's sloppy storytelling, and there's a scene, and I'm going to spoil the movie for you now, there's a scene where there's a transport that Chewbacca is on that blows up, and we think Chewbacca's dead, and yet we find out 2 scenes later that he isn't, and the Imperial Empire Final Order, whatever they're called this week, have actually got him all the way along. No one really dies in this movie, and that's the thing that is sloppy storytelling, and it's got bad real-world implications, because when my son's grandfather died, he asked if he was coming back, like Superman did in Batman versus Superman, when he came back from the dead. And I'm like, you can't do that. Sometimes deaths have to be final for the film to have weight. Otherwise, it's meaningless. Okay? And it's terrible that my son had to ask me whether his grandfather was going to come back to life, because he'd seen that happen so often in Hollywood movies. He believed it was possible. It's deception, it's deceit, and it's lying to children about things. So when characters die in movies, they've got to stay bloody dead. Okay, you can't just go, oh, and by the way, he was in another identical transport that we didn't see, that was off on the other screen, that came back off, so Chewie didn't really die, everything's okay. And they've got a bit where they do a memory wipe with C-3PO, and you're going, oh, I'm saying goodbye to my friends for the last time, and then 2 scenes later, they've got R2-D2's got a backup, we're just going to upload the rest of your memories from the cloud, apart from what happened in the last 2 scenes. It's lazy, sloppy shit storytelling, and it's just nonsense, you know. And there's a section in this when Hux is the spy, who says that the reason he's doing this is because he hates General Withnail and he wants him to fail. And I go, no, that's stupid. That is stupid storytelling that exists only to make the plot happen. Okay, there are other ways that you can give the characters and treat the characters with integrity and respect, because if you don't treat the characters with integrity and respect, the people that are watching the movie are going to do exactly what I saw happen in the Terminator movie, and someone's going to shout fuck off at the screen. It's awful. And we get to the end of the movie, we get to the bit where they get on the Death Star, and there's a wayfinder which is on the Death Star. Hang on, the wreckage of the Death Star that's in Endor. Okay, so you've gone to Endor, you don't meet the Ewoks, but you've gone to Endor, there's a Death Star. There's a scene with Kylo Ren and Rey, and they're fighting, and then Han turns up, some kind of Force ghosty thing that doesn't follow any of the truth that we've had in any other ones. Characters can come back from the dead and exist as Force ghosts, but Han hasn't got Force ghosts. So why have you got Han there, right? Oh, you've got Han there because Carrie Fisher's dead and you can't write your way out of it, and Harrison Ford is an actor who will do stuff if you pay him. Great actor, by the way, but yes, if you offer a check at Harrison Ford, he'll generally take it as long as it's big enough. Okay, so you've got that. You've got the end where you've got evil Rey as a vision. Right, that exists just for the trailers. It doesn't serve any narrative sense. It doesn't follow the logic that's been introduced in The Empire Strikes Back, by the way, where Luke goes into the Cave of Nightmares and sees an evil Luke and he sees himself and all that stuff. No, that doesn't make sense. You've got Rey that heals Kylo. After Kylo Ren gets defeated on the Death Star, he basically does and says nothing. His only job is to be a delivery boy for a lightsaber to Rey, and then he dies. There's some, what's the word, a vergence in the Force, or a triad or something, or dyad, whatever that is. And then you've got the bit at the end which gets all the fanboys wanking, because Kylo, who's dying, and Ren and Rey get a kiss, and Rey then heals Kylo and whatever. It's nonsense. It's all fucking nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. Someone's got a grab bag of broken biscuits of plot points that they've smushed together in some kind of sense, and hope to God that you'll pay enough money so that they can make some money at the end of the accounting quarter with the new Star Wars movie. No one sat down there long enough to take a step back and go, this is the film that's going to end 9 movies. This is going to be the trilogy of trilogies. Everything has to land correctly, and they need to plot through, what Finn, Rey, Poe, Han, Leia, Luke, Kylo, all the characters are going to do. Where logically would this end? Because where it wouldn't end is on a planet you've never heard of called Exegol, with Rey suddenly being revealed to be the granddaughter of the clone of Emperor Palpatine, with Kylo turning up, and there's some kind of weird, unrequited, sexy thing going on there. And then also, by the way, you're going to have 1,000 spaceships come out of the clouds. Now, when I watched this recently, I wrote a lot of notes about it. All these notes are on here, and it's probably best if I just show you what's on here, okay? So we can see it's bullshit, right? Where do all these fucking spaceships come from? It's just stuff. And that's exactly what this is, okay? So it's bullshit. The film is bullshit, It's bullshit and it's lies, and it doesn't make sense, and it breaks all the internal logic and narrative that it's put together. They get to Exegol, and then there's about 1,000 spaceships that turn up from nowhere. Where do these fucking spaceships come from? Who makes these spaceships? Who pays for these spaceships? And more correctly, how on earth do you make them fully staffed with hundreds of thousands of people and pay for them to have food, holidays, staff contracts, HR details, probably counselling or something as well, because given the fact that they've got to live on a cloud planet next to it, and no one can, and everyone's managed to be able to keep it a secret. We've seen government conspiracies. Governments are incompetent, and we can see that in our current government. We can see that in the previous administration that there was under Donald Judas Trump, is that these were incompetent governments that don't know how to project plan. Don't think that in the Star Wars world they're any more competent than that. If you had 1,000 spaceships and over 1 million people piloting those spaceships, somebody wouldn't let the cat out of the bag. These people have got friends, they've got families, they've got children, they've got take your dog to work days. In some way the secret is going to get out, and they're all going to go, no, I'm just going for a big tour on Exegol. Oh, sorry, not Exegol. I'm going to Northfield. Yeah, planet Northfield. Honest. Yeah, what's the weather like there? And we'll go, no, it's bullshit. All right. And then you've got, the Resistance turn up at the end. You've got this big scene where they were doing these transmissions that were saying, come and fight the baddies in a place. And then all of a sudden, thousands of ships turn up. And most of them aren't battleships, by the way. Someone's brought a potato peeler to a knife fight. That's what's happened at the end of it. And somehow the Resistance have got Lando, Nine Num, Wedge going, woohoo, I'm Wedge, remember me? I was like, no, mate, you're not Wedge. In fact, it took until the point where somebody pointed out in the credits that it was the same guy that played Wedge that it made me realise this guy in an orange suit who was white-haired was Wedge. I'm like, it's Wedge? Wedge Antilles? And you gave him one line? That's bullshit. By the way, the actress that plays Rose, gets 76 seconds in this movie, which is disgraceful. It's like, what's the bare contractual minimum that we can give a character from the previous movie? 76 seconds. Leia gets maybe 4 minutes. Now, I know Carrie Fisher died and that wasn't in the plan, but 4 minutes isn't good enough for that. Han Solo turns up to be Basil Exposition at certain points, and then Leia turns up, and then she says a few things, and it's clearly just offcuts from the other movie. Where it's lines of dialogue that they haven't used that they've repurposed, plus some CGI replacements over her daughter's face, I think. And then there's a scene where Luke picks up the lightsaber. This is Force Luke, by the way, not real Luke. Ghost Luke manages to catch a lightsaber that's been thrown and go, that's not the way to treat a Jedi's weapon, as if to go, sorry, Ryan, we're going to throw all the work you threw in and put it in the bin. We're going to put something else in there because a Jedi's lightsaber needs to be treated with respect. It's like, no, actually. People learn and they change over time, and they don't repeat their previous mistakes unless they're fucking idiots. And as far as I'm concerned, Luke isn't a fucking idiot. Sorry I'm swearing, ladies and jelly spoons, but I feel really strongly about this, is that if you continue to repeat the mistakes of the past, you are a moron. And Luke clearly learned from what had happened previously and went, I'm not going to repeat that, until J.J. Abrams comes in and goes, yeah, you are going to repeat it, and here's a check. And Force Luke deserves more respect than he is treated in this movie, and it makes a mockery of the previous films that comes out. Luke becomes Vlad the Explainer, and he tells you certain things because the writing is too poor. It's written terribly, and whoever it is who wrote it, I do know their name, should be ashamed of having their name attached to this absolute atrocity of narrative and nonsense. There's also a scene where Rey manages to raise an X-Wing out of the water. Now, the X-Wing's been in the water for 30 years, and yet all you need to do is to raise it, and because you've got force powers, it switches straight back on. I don't know what planet they're on. Whatever the Porg planet is called, it's clearly laws of physics apply differently, and water doesn't corrode and rust X-Wings. Either that or X-Wings are absolutely slathered in WD-40, and there's a tiny mini force field that must have been put there that covers the X-Wing in case Luke changes his mind. And no, it's nonsense, isn't it? It's the Force in it. But as Han said in The Force Awakens, that's not how the Force works, and it's just nonsense. it breaks its own internal logic and consistency at so many points. It's actually insulting. I've written shopping lists that are smarter than the plot for The Rise of Skywalker. It abandons the character arcs. Because the characters start to serve the conclusion and not their own characteristics. Finn's arc collapses. They do nothing with him. The Kylo and Rey arc is absolutely nonsensical fan fiction that is worse than the time where that unrequited love thing got solved in the X-Files, because everyone stopped watching it as soon as it happened. The Emperor is a nonsensical character. It's just clearly someone's just gone through a checklist of things and go, yeah, okay, the Emperor, will throw him in there. Poe doesn't grow. Poe's opinion is still to blast the shit out of anything he can think of, and that's not good enough. His character deserves better than this. It's just awful. I hate it, and I can't really talk in any great detail much more about it. Okay, so Rise of Skywalker, it's craven, nonsensical fan fiction. It's awful. It's the worst Star Wars movie. I think maybe the holiday special is just as bad in a completely different way. But it's just, I do not recommend it at all. Now I'm gonna pause the video for a second so I can have a drink, have a sneeze, and then I'll wrap up. Okay, so we're back, and what I've done is I've taken the opportunity to load up the review of The Rise of Skywalker that I wrote at the time that it came out, to see if my view has changed since there. And my view absolutely hasn't changed. I was incredibly disappointed with The Rise of Skywalker when it came out. I still am. I'd completely forgotten, a month after the film had come out, that there was even The Rise of Skywalker in existence. I only saw it once in the cinema. I didn't feel the need to go back to it. And I think even seeing it once was too much. I would much preferred, actually, The Last Jedi to be the last film of the series, and for it to break off halfway through, kind of like the second season of The Tripods did, where you didn't get the conclusion, so that you didn't have the inevitable crushing disappointment of narrative nonsense that went through it. It's kind of like Star Wars. It does a lot of Star Wars things, but if George Lucas had written The Rise of Skywalker, nobody would be approving of it. Everyone would be kicking at it and going, "Oh, everyone's just just does what George pays them to do," and they'd be absolutely right. So the stakes for the film really are, it either is a carefully crafted conclusion to a 9-film trilogy of trilogies arc, or it's completely hollow and empty, and it's been made up as it goes along. Every few minutes in The Rise of Skywalker, somebody turns up and goes, "Remember this? Remember that? Remember this? Oh, look, there's that as well. That's a thing. Yeah, remember that? Oh, look, there's a character in the background that looks like an action figure that you had when you were 7. Remember that? Yeah." It's like, no, it's just nonsense. Everything The Last Jedi did well. The huge possibilities of random force powers hiding inside anyone or everyone, and the removal of the chosen one bloodline elements, and the brave rejection of expectations that people had in order to show character developments, they were all junked, and they were spontaneously retconned into what I call a nonsensical mismatch of comforting incoherence. The problem here comes down to J.J. Abrams' style, really. He's very good at planting mysteries. He is no good at solving them. He has no answers. He's the wise sage that asks, who is the fool? The fool or the fool that follows him? He's not the guy that's got the answers. J.J. Abrams has no answers. Right? He's just good at asking questions, and all he really is it's kind of like watching an episode of Pointless with lightsabers. Lots and lots of questions, not necessarily any answers. And it's the narrative stitches it all together in a way that's cowardly and small and reductive, and it reduces Star Wars to like a global interstellar version of the fantastic family of the fated few. It's not as outwardly it's not as outright dumb as Spectre or Prometheus or Star Trek Into Darkness, but it's pretty damn close. And I don't go into a movie wanting to be disappointed. I go into a movie wanting to be blown away, wanting to be astounded by the amazing narrative power and the vision and the things that I couldn't imagine. And here we go. Yeah, we're going to go back to Endor. We're going to go back to Jakku. We're going to go to fuck it, we're probably going to go back to Hoth. I don't know if Hoth's in there. Probably go to Coruscant as well. We're going to throw some Jar Jar Binks. We're going to get a gigantic space thingy. Here's Emperor Palpatine. Remember him? And it's just nonsense. You know, characters aren't going to die, by the way. We're going to pretend that they're going to die for a couple of scenes. And the character that does have his memory wiped, we're just going to load up with a fantastic USB stick of dreams, stick it back in, and he's going to remember everything. That's how it's going to work. We're going to kill Nine Numb. Wedge is going to get a line. Lando's going to turn up and get next to nothing to say. By the way, the Ewoks, we're going to get Warwick and Warwick's son, who are going to be there. We're going to have them. That's absolutely fine. And then Palpatine is going to turn up as a big bad who's been quietly moving everything around in the background, even though no one's referred to him for the past 2 movies, and somehow magically survived being thrown thousands of feet down into the heart of a nuclear reactor in a Death Star that was just about to blow up. But it isn't really him. It's a clone, but we've never mentioned clones before, or at least apart from that clone that we did in Attack of the Clones. And dude, if you could perfect clones in Attack of the Clones, why the hell can't you perfect clones, 60 years later? You know, it's like suddenly going, well, we did have computers in the previous movies, now we've got an abacus. It's not good enough. And here's some Snokes in a jar as well, just so that you're aware that we could get clones correct, but only for Snokes. We can't get clones correct for Palpatine. And don't forget Rey, your Palpatine's granddaughter, because it's just stupid. It's stupid, lazy, by the numbers, dot to dot, painting the blanks, nonsensical, fucking awful, embarrassing script writing. It's like somebody asked a 14-year-old to write a Star Wars movie and they sent in a spec script and somehow it got made. It's not good enough. All right, it's technically Rise of Skywalker is fantastic. Plot wise, it is lazy, it is incoherent, it's nonsense. It's the alphabeti spaghetti of Star Wars. It's a bolognese made out of obligations, leftovers, limited ingredients, and a cowardly desire to please everyone, but ends up pleasing nobody. The characters don't make sense anymore. The intelligence of the characters is reduced to idiocy. Hux manages to betray absolutely everything he showed in the previous 2 films because the plot needs them to paint their way out of a corner, so let's make Hux a traitor because he's jealous of Kylo Ren. And it's fan fiction, it's squalid, and it's poorly constructed narrative gibberish that, as I call in my review, is creatively useless and chicken shit. And just in case any of you do like The Rise of Skywalker, that's great, but you must have been watching a different film to me. I wanted to go in and see a great movie, but having seen Star Trek Into Darkness, I did not have high hopes for J.J. Abrams and his science fiction trilogies. He managed to balls up another franchise with Star in the title. He managed to balls up this franchise with Star in the title, and if he didn't, then Kathleen Kennedy and her bunch did, because they needed to go and hit a release date as opposed to make a film that was going to stand the test of time. What people remember about The Rise of Skywalker is not that the accountants managed to hit a bottom line return for the December 2019 quarter, just before COVID-19 get in. What people remember about Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker is that it was the last Star Wars film with Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher and Han Solo in, Chewbacca, R2-D2, C-3PO, Lando, and it was pretty fucking rubbish because the story didn't make a lick of sense and it looked like it was constructed out of leftovers, and that is something that Star Wars didn't deserve to have happen to it. I've decided not to carry on talking about the film because what's the point, guys? The film exists. Somebody out there inevitably loves it. But what I've heard, according to that Reddit thread, is that there is a 3-hour version of the movie that fills in a lot of the holes, that makes the film a lot better. And surely the House of the Mouse should do something about that and release expanded versions of the films. Maybe to do director's editions. Now, obviously, the director's edition of the original films in 1997, not great. But as long as we don't CGI in a whole bunch of extra nonsense, and actually you just take the deleted scenes and stick them back into the movie, that might actually, you might rescue the Rise of Skywalker. I recently watched another film called Dune by David Lynch. The 2.5 hour version of the film that was released in 1984 is atrocious. The 3 hour version of it that contains all the deleted scenes is almost watchable, and I think we're in roughly the same position with the Rise of Skywalker, where we had a studio that doesn't know its arse from its elbow and released a film for a target date as opposed to releasing a film that told the story correctly. Studios, and I understand completely the machinations of money, but let's face it, Disney are loaded. You guys got loads of money. You can live with an extra few months tinkering to make the film really, really good, as opposed to making the film come out on a really nice date for your accountants. Okay, I know it's show business and there's no show without the business, but for God's sake, don't rush this stuff. Think about the story that needs to be told and tell it, because the only thing that people now remember in years to come, when everyone's forgotten about the profit ratio for Disney in 2019, what people remember is the Rise of Skywalker any good or not? And what we've seen is the answer is no, it isn't. Star Wars should be treated with more respect than it was by Disney in the Rise of Skywalker, and I completely understand why J.J. Abrams suggested taking his name off the film and why he hasn't done a director's commentary in, primarily because his director's commentary might possibly be, well, this is the bit where Lucasfilm forced me to do something else. This is the bit where Lucasfilm forced me to introduce the insert where they go, oh, they fly now so they can sell more stories, sell more toys. This is the bit where I did that. This is the bit where I was told to do that. This is the scene which got cut out, which is where Finn finally told Rey what he was going to say all the way along, which, by the way, was what Finn thought that he might possibly have been force sensitive. But unless you read the novelisation, you're not going to find that out. And it's just awful, and I'm not sad, because I don't get sad about movies. Star Wars is just a bunch of movies. It's just space wizards. But from a purely narrative perspective, Star Wars deserved more respect and more integrity than it was treated with by Disney. Disney saw it as a way of making a load of money, and they didn't see it for what it was. It's a great bit of cultural legacy that should be treated with respect. If you're going to write sequels to films that people love, make the sequels good, or do not bother. It's not good enough separating people from their money in order to sell a movie ticket, because all you end up spoiling it. You get a short-term hit of cash, and you get a long-term suspicion by people going, well, the last one wasn't very good, was it? Why should I bother going to see that? And so therefore, what you've got to do is that you've got to do something that makes sense. I have written smarter shopping lists than the Rise of Skywalker. It gives me no pleasure to say that whatsoever. And I think at this point I'm just going to stop, and I'm going to do another Notcast about something else that isn't that. Now, other Notcasts that have happened. There have been some questions around what's on the shelves behind me. I'll get to those in a bit. I'm going to do one about bootleg t-shirts. I've been asked about the Wonder stuff and how much I love that band. I'm sure I'll get onto that at some point. I'm still listening to U2 albums, so there's going to be more U2 episodes coming up. There's going to be more New Order ones. I'm also going through all the Cure albums, listening to them chronologically in order of release, and I'm going to talk about the Cure albums at some point. Very probably Pet Shop Boys, very probably Depeche Mode as well. I'm planning on doing a couple of these a week between now and until such time as I get bored and get ejected out into space by Ming the Merciless. And at that point, I'm going to stop. I hope you're having a lovely Valentine's Day. Hopefully you aren't watching this on Valentine's Day because you've probably got better things to do. But if you haven't, then hopefully your day is going great as well. I have a meeting downstairs with some lasagna later. I'm going to really, really enjoy that. So, as usual, don't be a dick in the comments. Any questions that you've got, ask nicely, and I will see you all again at a future episode with any luck. Adios, amigos, as the Ramones said on their last live album. See you again soon. Bye.